This is the symbolism of beautiful This is the symbolism This is the symbolism of beautiful
This episode will dive into the science of success. That means how biology and trauma impact our ability to achieve our goals. So we're going to be exploring the latest research and strategies that can help you and me to achieve our full potential. And also it helps us overcome challenges and achieve sustainable success. So with the help of my special guest today, Matt is the founder and president of Questful. We're going to be uncovering the myths and truths around how biology and life experience shape our brains. And also we'll be exploring how our ability to perform and succeed is connected to biology. And when I mean biology, I mean trauma, how it affects our ability to succeed. You also learn about the science behind resilience, decision making, addiction, mental health, and discover practical tips to increase your productivity. Not just only increasing your productivity, also to overcome anxiety, stress, and grow as a leader. Because that's what this program is all about. Ability to grow as a leader. So talking about Matt, he's a business consultant also. He has over 25 years in business transformational related roles at organizations of all sizes across nearly a dozen different industries, as well as an MBA from Penn State. He has also spent over 10 years studying achievement, well-being, health from perspective of psychology, nutrition, neurology, physiology, and mindfulness. And he has been able to make connection between diverse fields to help others on their quest. His latest project is the combination of over 5 years of studying the reason why we get stuck achieving our goals and how to break through those areas. And I'm sure almost every entrepreneur have one or two challenges, especially having to be able to move to the next stage. So now in this episode is going to talk about how biology can actually, how trauma can impact our ability to achieve goals. So winners, help me welcome Matt McCarthy.
Thank you so much for having me here.
All right, you're welcome. So, Matt, can you help us understand the role of neurobiology in our success and decision-making process?
Yeah, it really comes down to one key area of our neurology. And that is, a lot of people are familiar with the fight or flight mechanism within our brain. And that is effectively if a real physical threat becomes apparent, our bodies end up making a choice before we can even take time to think about it. We will either prepare to fight that threat, and that depends on whether we think we can win, or we will flee. Okay, so we will run away. That's if we don't think we will win or we have the opportunity and it makes more sense. And again, we're not thinking about that. But there are a couple of other reactions as part of this system that we don't really hear about, much less think about. One is freeze, and the other is fawn. So freezing is self-explanatory. We don't do anything. In nature, you might think of a possum playing dead, that adage, or an animal playing dead, hoping the predator is not interested anymore. Fawn is more of a human trait, and that would be where we kind of, I think the Americanized term would be suck up to the person who is a threat, sycophantic behavior. All of these come into play when there is a threat. The problem in our current day and age is we see things as threats that aren't really threats. We have, have a situation with a boss or a client or in our personal lives where we think something may go wrong. Vast majority of these times, it's not life or death, which is what the fight or flight was designed for. It's just part of your day to day. So if we are responding like that, we end up sabotaging what we were trying to do. So if we are in the midst of stress and yet we need to do something that is outside of our comfort zone to move forward to achieve what we are aiming to achieve, we lose that ability because suddenly the brain is hijacking your body and saying, no, we are going to freeze this time. We're just not going to do anything. Okay, so that's under typical American stress or typical Western world stress. That is enough to keep you from the goal. The thing that extended it for me, and this actually became a personal, I'll use the word quest, not to belabor the term, but became a personal quest because I understood stress, understood the impact of that on how my body works. I understood how it saps motivation, how it can give us brain fog when we really need to think most. It can even cause pain, which is, needless to say, very distracting. But I was having particular difficulty managing stress. So this did become a personal story. Why can't I do X? Well, it's my stress. Why can't I keep that down? And so I did a lot of research. I looked at everything from, the body's inflammation, how we're eating or how our activity affects that inflammation. I looked at mindfulness. I looked at a number of areas, philosophy and spirituality, just ways of how can I ease that stress on a long-term basis so I don't have to keep repeatedly rescue myself when I'm in this state of alarm. And I came across research from actually three different sources, two of which are doctors and one is a deep researcher, that tied trauma, particularly early childhood or developmental trauma, to higher degrees of everyday stress, as well as typically anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. So that led me to dig even deeper and make some connections that, look, I'll speak for an American audience here. There are cultural events. We went through a recession. I think that impacted actually a broad swath of people globally in 2008. In my particular case, I nearly lost everything. There was COVID much more recently, and that affected pretty much everybody across the world. Those are forms of cultural trauma. And so that right there is going to slow some people down from achieving what they're trying to achieve. In my case, it was even earlier than that. I'm going to give you a little bit of information just for background, just so you can understand how it relates. I was adopted as a baby. And there were two factors related to that directly resulted in trauma. One was while my birth mother was pregnant with me, apparently she endured some major traumatic event. It's still a mystery to me exactly what that was. I'm still trying to investigate it. But that very action, as it turns out, the stress response floods the person's body with adrenaline and with cortisol and a number of other stress hormones. Well, in a pregnant mom, those don't stop at her body, those go straight to the baby too. So here I am, some point during my development, I'm flooded with extra adrenaline. And because it's trauma and not just, an exciting, scary movie, it's trauma. It's going to be long lasting. There's going to be a higher level of cortisol and adrenaline in the body for a longer period of time. And so my body rewired based on it. And then the other portion of that, once I was born, I was placed in what I think we would call a receiving home, which is like a temporary orphanage, while the legal documentation was taking place to get me to my adoptive parents. And that was, my understanding, is a period of 10, 12 weeks. And that period of time, I had no parental caring, no parental love. And yeah, there are caretakers and they make sure I'm fed, changed all the usual things. But there's no love and caring going on. And other research has shown that that is critical, especially in the first few months of development, for a child to feel safe. Without that, they have a much higher tendency to go into this alarm state that I talked about earlier, or a state of stress. So that was a long way of explaining that it's the very trauma that I endured, and I left out a few parts in between the birth and early childhood and the recession. But those things became barriers to me for even getting the small tasks done that lead to the big projects that lead to success. So that was the missing link for me. And I would say for a large number of people that aren't aware, look, this childhood trauma or this traumatic event that I experienced is getting in the way of me living the fulfilling life that I want to live.
All right. Thank you for that information. But as you were, making the point, I came up with a lot of questions that I feel like I really want clarification for a lot of our listeners. All right.
Yeah.
The first question I'm gonna ask, just a follow-up question, is you talked about childhood trauma, right? So I'm just gonna ask two questions, and I want you to answer that, together. So how can you explain how childhood trauma can affect brain development and our ability, not just only brain development, and our ability to achieve as adults? I know you try to do an explanation about it, but I feel like probably I would love an in-depth information about it also. Another question I wanna ask is, I'm very curious about that, is you talk about stress, all right? So now I feel there's difference between chronic stress and stress. So how does chronic stress and anxiety impact the brain, and what does that mean for reaching our goals? So those are the questions I want to ask for now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll ask you to remind me of the second question once we get there, because the first one will take a little bit of explanation. Our bodies have a way of achieving something called homeostasis. That's just a complicated way of, we like things to stay the same and consistent, even if that same and consistent is bad. So we like that emotionally, and neurologically, our bodies like that. If you look at it, it's kind of like a thermostat in your house. It gets set to a certain temperature, and the heater or an air conditioner will kick on or off to keep you at that same temperature. Now, with our bodies, changing the set temperature that you want, it's a lot more complicated than changing a thermostat. So taking that thermostat or that homeostasis idea, when you're very early on, your body is recognizing that state of, I'm going to insert another term, alert, which is kind of like your body's alarm system is turned on and ready to go. So it gets used to that state of alert on a regular basis. And if it sees, okay, there's no threats going on, that alert stays in place and it's still ready to go, even on a hair trigger. Okay. In some cases, it doesn't even like the fact that there are no threats. So your brain imagines threats. Okay. We start worrying about finances, even if we are doing just fine. We may worry about relationships that, the relationship is going great, but we see one thing that we mistakenly recognize as a red flag. So we try and unconsciously keep ourselves from getting out of that homeostasis. So that's really where the early childhood development is. If you think about somebody who went through, let's just say I don't want to say optimal childhood, because what really is that, and is that ever achievable? But say a nicely normal childhood, and their traumatic event doesn't happen until, say, they're 30, they're 35. Their brain's fully formed, fully wired. It's done. There's some plasticity you can change, but they've known this state of relative calm through their life. If they have a traumatic event at 35, their body is going to work to get back to that normal state. Whereas somebody who endured their trauma ages, I would say anywhere 0 to 25, because that's when the 25 is around when they believe the brain stops its formation process. You're much more likely to stay in that heightened state of alert. So did that answer that first question for you well?
Yeah, great for me. So for the second question, to remind you again, I'm trying to, differentiate between stress and chronic stress.
Mm-hmm.
So now the question now is, how does chronic stress and anxiety impact the brain? And what does that mean for reaching our goals?
Yeah. So the differentiation, and I'll clarify just in case the listeners need it. Some stress is fine. It's normal to feel stress in certain situations. You're not used to public speaking and you're going up to speak in front of 1,000 people. Yeah, you're probably going to have some stress, and that's fine. In fact, stress can help your body perform. The adrenaline that I mentioned that comes out under stress, I don't know if you've heard the stories of like a woman being able to lift the car so that her child can get out, or so somebody can get her child out. That's thought to come from the adrenaline coursing through her body. Okay, so that's one example of short-term stress. There's even examples of good stressors or hormetic stressors. So there's a lot of people talking about cold plunge these days, or even strength training, is putting your body through stress so that it can actually get itself stronger, or in some way better repair or better prepare for everything coming forward. So those things are short-term stressors. When you have anxiety or a high-level background alert going on, the body starts to get used to that. And you're pumping hormones through your body that prevent you from doing the things that you want. Adrenaline is a hormone that also causes certain effects. It causes your blood to move away from your brain and focus more on your limbs, your arms and your legs, with the thought being, if you are going to fight or flee, You need your legs and arms much more than you need your brain. That creates a brain fog. You know that term where you can't seem to pull the words that you need, or for some reason you just can't focus straight. Anybody who's trying to accomplish something that is thought oriented, they're not going to be able to do that well under stress. It also, this is an interesting one, it can also pull resources away from your immune system. So you are more likely to get sick or have higher levels of inflammation that just sit there. And that can result in physical pain, can result in illness. It can even result in chronic illnesses or immunological diseases. So all of those things are plenty to derail you. But I would say the most critical one is typically that freeze or fawn mechanism.
So, thank you for that important information. So, while you were talking, I was trying to put some things together, and I thought about, are there any links between trauma? We talked about trauma. Addiction, addiction is not something you get, when you're a kid, or, trauma is like from birth for some people, due to one or two things. Addiction could be picked along the way. What does research say about this?
So, actually, the book right there, it's called The Myth of Normal, that red one right there, is a seminal work on trauma and its contribution to particularly addiction in mental health. As far as the mechanisms, I think I can go there, but more importantly, the research shows that those who go through trauma are far more likely to be prone to addiction in their lives. That can be addiction to your typical things, alcoholism, illicit drugs, things like that. It can even be addiction to eating improperly, or addiction to unhealthy relationships, too much TV, any of those. So there's definitely a link there. I think in terms of why it happens, it's much more of a soothing or self-soothing type behavior. One thing I'll mention, this should help tie it together. There are two main attributes to trauma in order for us to really consider it to be trauma. One is lack of control. You have no agency or no ability to choose in the situation. In my case, I was a baby and or a fetus. Yeah, there's no ability to change the situation. In somebody who, say, was involved in an armed robbery at a bank worker, okay, they have no control in the situation, or at least feel no control. The other, and this is the salient point, is the ability to either be soothed, comforted in the time of the event that's seen as traumatic, or to do so themselves. Let me see if I said that right. The ability to either soothe themselves or have somebody there to soothe them. A child who, say, falls out of a tree, breaks a leg, if they are not discovered for a couple of hours, they're not able to soothe themselves. They're a child that's difficult at that age, and they're helpless. They can't walk home. That would be a traumatic experience. That same child, if they fall out of a tree in front of their mother may be able to rush to their side, provide comforting words, and also help get their child to care. So the very same event, under different circumstances, can be traumatic or not. So that soothing, I think, is really key in the addiction side of things. You're doing anything you can to help yourself feel better, even if it is an unhealthy thing that will, in the long run, make you feel worse.
All right. Thank you for that analysis. And another thing that came up with me when we were talking, I know quite a number of people. Like I know a kid who's very, very out there, speaks, love to speak, and all of a sudden, he had this withdrawal, stop talking, and all that. So, I wanted to ask, how do social anxiety, shyness, and sometimes imposter syndrome relate to
Mhm.
biology and trauma related factors, especially when
That's
we
a
are talking about this biology, you know, being a factor for success.
Yeah, that's a great question because that is another key area that holds us back. Obviously, a lot of success that we aim for, say, in the business world or our personal world, really relies on our ability to connect with other people. So let's use a fictional version of the example that you gave. Let's say it is a child that endured a I'm making this up and I want to make sure that I don't cause a trigger for somebody. But it's really the only way that I can come up with an example. Imagine it's a child that goes through a sexual assault, and it's a real terrible one. There was no means of comfort. There was no control. So they've been assaulted. If it is young enough in their development and they don't have enough support, that can definitely cause them to withdraw, like you were saying. So that withdrawal would often be, and please keep in mind, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist. I speak based on research that I've read from um, other sources. But it would cause them to feel a sense of fear. Suddenly, their otherwise normal life had some event that they could not predict that completely changed everything for them. Their ability to feel stability is gone. Suddenly, well, I don't know. Is there a threat tomorrow? If I run across the same person, is something else going to happen? How am I going to handle that? So that level of fear, that's raising their alert level that we talked about earlier. So their alert level's higher. They're going to be more apt to be fearful of anything that could be perceived as a threat. So being around other people, who's going to attack me next? Okay. Um, I could probably go on with this example, but I think that drives the point home.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, looking at the solutions to some of these problems, especially when it comes to trauma, I did a little bit of research, and I've, have you heard of brain stimulation therapies?
Yeah. So like TMS, transmagnetic therapy. Um, yeah. No, I've heard a lot about those. I have not experienced them myself. Um, I am hearing, let's say, two sides of the coin. One, the latest therapies that are out, one I've heard of came out of a Stanford program called Accelerated TMS. That is apparently showing good results over a period of roughly a week that are long lasting. I think they're focusing on PTSD and on major depression as a diagnosis. Um, to calibrate their results. Now, the other part that I'm hearing though is because it relies on basically magnets stimulating certain parts of the brain, and those parts of the brain can be different depending on the person, what they've experienced. They're still working on the tuning capabilities to get the magnetic frequencies right and the locations right. So again, I don't endorse or dissuade people from doing it. But it's something that seems to be showing a lot of promise, even if it may or may not be there yet.
All right. So, most times people, consultant, therapists always talk about um, life changes to be able to overcome a situation. So, are there any life changes or approach that you would recommend for individual who are working to overcome trauma-related barriers?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say at the beginning, I definitely encourage, if somebody's gone through enough where they are truly suffering, I definitely encourage seeking professional medical or mental health assistance with it. I coach people who have gone through trauma on the performance side of things. I'm not a trauma therapist, and I definitely encourage it where it's appropriate. So that's one aspect of it. But in terms of, if somebody has really gone through the trauma counseling, they still have the physiological things to deal with. We have a couple of levers. I'll call them that. First off, there are some short-term tips and tricks, using that term kind of loosely, that you can employ to help just for really intense situations. And those are simple breathing techniques that you can use to calm yourself in the moment so that you can go on and handle whatever that next step is. And then from that next step, then it's time to step away and recover. I still go through these times myself, and I do have to step back and say, okay, I need 30 seconds. I need a minute. And I will sit there, breathe slowly through my nose. I'll count. The exact number doesn't necessarily matter, but I'll count, say, to 4 or 6 or whatever I feel I can do. I'll even hold it for a couple of seconds. I'll let it out as slowly as I can. And that actually helps to take that limbic system out of the fight or flight mode. It reduces the stress hormones that are going through your body. So in a pinch, that's important. There are also other mechanisms like that that help on a slightly longer basis. And that would be things like, say, mindfulness meditation, or if you have a Calm app or something similar to that, you may listen to a stress reduction guided meditation. Those things can help. But the real answer, you talked about life changes. That's really where the real answer lies. It just takes more time to get there. The life changes that I tend to lean on in coaching is the idea of creating space in your life. We in the Western world have a good habit of filling all available space. In fact, there's even something talked about as Parkinson's law, and that is that the task will grow to take all the time that's allotted to complete it. You can apply the same thing to meetings. You can apply that to all kinds of areas of your life. But if you create space, I'll explain how that helps. But if you create space in 4 different areas, one is going to be your time. You need time buffers. 2 is going to be your mental capability. If you're trying to think about too many things all at once, none of them are going to get their focus. And by the way, this space idea, this can apply to anybody who just has a stressful life. It doesn't have to go to trauma. The trauma part is getting yourself calmed down in the moment so that you can do these things. So I mentioned time, I mentioned mental, I mentioned emotional, or I will mention emotional. If you are going through too many things that have emotional weight to them, you will go back into a high alert or even an alarm state very quickly. So making sure that you're not trying to launch something new that you're nervous about, and having the holidays with a family that's stressful for you, and also trying to, say, adopt a new child, or if you have too many of these things that have emotional weight going on at one time, again, you will max out that alert and go straight into alarm. Super easy. Worse yet, that could end up resulting into a major state of anxiety or even major depression. So just a little more transparency to anybody listening, I've done those things. So it's real. I've lived it. I don't want anybody else to live it. The fourth area out of those four is financial. For most of us, finances are an emotional laden topic. So if we don't have a cushion, a buffer, if you will, in our finances, anything financial for us, even paying the rent or mortgage, or making sure that our food budget for the week or the month is straight, that can become stressful, and that again becomes a barrier. I think, as an aside, I think that's one reason why you find people in lower socioeconomic situations less able to rise above it, if you will, and achieve major goals. They have less means, which means they have to worry more about the things that aid their survival, their place to live, their food, the things that they absolutely need. So creating the space, that's the biggest thing. I have several others in my coaching approach that I use, but I would think to go through those would take quite a bit longer than we have today. So,
All right. So talking about your coaching approach, right?
Mhm.
I want to ask a question about that. So are there specific coaching or psychological strategies that are particularly well suited to mitigate the effect of biological or traumatic barriers to success? Are there any?
Yeah, so the coaching process takes into account both the short and long term approaches. One without the other will not work. So it starts with understanding how trauma is affecting you. Both how is it affecting you physiologically, and how is it impacting your life or the goals that you're trying to achieve. And remind me later, I'll talk about an assessment that I use with all my clients, and I've even made it available to your listeners. We can talk about that later. But to understand the degree to which trauma is, the results of trauma, residual from trauma, is impacting your ability to have the fulfilling life that you want. The second then would be to go through the short-term approaches that we talked about. It's really important to have those short-term techniques down, or at least have a set of them in your pocket, if you will, that you can draw upon. Because if you don't get that short-term level of alert down, you're not going to be able to complete even sometimes the most basic tasks needed. You'll end up getting stuck. You'll end up bringing emotions into something that doesn't have to be emotional. And you'll end up freezing. Or you'll end up just fawning, which I didn't really spend a whole lot of time on. But that would be a good way of looking at that, is looking to others to tell you what to do. And you're doing what others say to do. The problem with that is that, there are 8 billion people in the world? That means there are probably about 8 billion people, 8 billion different opinions on what to do, or something like that. So it's really hard to focus on 8 billion things at once. So anyway, the short-term approaches so that you can go to the longer term. The longer term, we go through a half dozen different areas, 7 to be clear. One is about creating that space, creating the buffers that you need in your life. And it's a slow approach because sometimes those things that are taking up our finances, our time, our mental, our emotional areas, they can't just be cut out right away. If you are working in a job that is not aligned to who you are as a person, it is soul sucking, as the term may go. You feel like you're quiet quitting. You may not be able to leave that job lest you find yourself out on the streets, homeless and hungry. But you find another area or a step toward being able to move to something that has more fulfillment, is better for you emotionally. So taking those smaller steps. Also finding those things that you are doing, which truly are optional, that could be cut out. If it's financial, maybe you're spending, your finances are tight, but you're spending money on an expensive luxury car or some other expensive luxury for yourself. And, it's, you really don't need it. You could sell it off and get rid of that payment. And maybe you're able to get around using either a much less expensive car, public transit, a bike, a scooter, whatever it may be. And that may feel hard. And you may get stuck. Again, the fawning, what would other people think if I got rid of my Land Rover? Oh no. They might think something's wrong. Well, guess what? Something's wrong. It's more being real. So taking care of things like that can quickly give you some space. It gives you space in your budget, so you can start putting some money aside, and it gives you space emotionally. So that's the thing about space is a lot of times one action will free up space in multiple areas. So a couple of the other areas, because I've spent a lot of time on the space, one may be working on healing the body. If you eat what we call a standard American diet, which is often things like chips, soda, just all kinds of processed food, you're creating inflammation in your body just because your body reacts to those foods. And inflammation, as it happens, tends to create additional stress on your body. Your body releases more of the stress hormones. It also, those foods tend to grow the wrong gut bacteria. I don't know if you're familiar with the gut microbiome, but that's been topic of a lot of discussion over the last several years. Apparently, the vast majority, something like 80% of the feel-good hormones that we need, or neurotransmitters that we need, like serotonin, dopamine, they're created in the gut. So if we're feeding it the wrong thing, we're creating a downer for ourselves. So that's another area. Mind healing can go a lot of different ways, but that might be something that's represented by meditation on a little bit of a longer term. It might even be represented by something like yoga, which is both physical and mental, and also would fall into a spiritual, if you will, area. So working with somebody that I'm coaching, I'm helping them understand those areas and also helping them strategize what areas are going to be most effective for them given their situation, the trauma they've been through. I don't always have to know the details, of course, but what they've been through, what their situation is, what they're trying to accomplish, and what they have to work with. So effectively setting up a plan. And then accountability on that plan. Accountability, not necessarily in the sense of being a slave driver, making sure they get everything done, but more in the sense of encouragement. Look, this is something that you really want. And it is hard, but you can get through this. Maybe we try a different approach and approach this in smaller chunks, things of that nature. So that's effectively what I would go through with the coaching client.
Thank you for that detailed information. I love the way you broke it down. So you spoke about neurotransmitters. So I want to, ask a question in that particular field. So how do hormonal and neurotransmitter imbalances affect our success and productivity? So, and what can we do about them? Because people say there's nothing we can do about it. So what can we do about them?
Mm-hmm. So that's right now a controversial area. So I'll be straight out, and I'm not a neuroscience. I don't have a PhD in neuroscience. I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm not one who would be able to prescribe medications to try and rebalance it. But the best of my understanding at this point is that we'll say medications that rebalance the neurotransmitters seem to be helpful short term, but their effects decrease over time. So that either causes an increase in the dosage to try and keep up with it, or if the side effects are not tolerable, the person going through it is going to want to get off of that. And that can become dangerous, especially if they try and get off of these medications without doctor supervision, especially cold turkey. My thought, based on the research that I've read, is a different approach. And that would be, if you are in deep depression, like major depression, maybe utilizing a medication in the short term, like crutches. If you had broken a leg, you want to stay off of it. The medication may help in the short term. But going at it from a root cause perspective is going to be much more beneficial in the long term. It may simply be, in the case of trauma, it's pretty clear what the root cause is. But in the case of somebody who may not have gone through that kind of trauma, it may be a matter of that standard American diet being the main contributor. And simply by cutting out soda and processed foods, somebody may have a much more balanced set of neurotransmitters going on in their body. And their mood elevates. That enables them to do more, which further elevates their mood, and so on. Activity is another area where it produces, I think it's serotonin, which was what we come back to as the runner's high. To me, it's more often the lifestyle approaches. Yeah, that's where I would go.
All right. Thank you so much. Because some people will always say you always like when people make their own statements, some are true, some are not true. So when we talk about genetics, so genetics itself, they say genetic factors sometimes influences our success and likelihood of facing trauma. When it comes to success and trauma.
That's another good question, and it's a controversial area once again. I think there are some things that you can say clearly can lead to success in certain areas that are governed by genetics. If you look at something surfacey like being a supermodel, there are some aspects of their genetics that, if they didn't fit certain attributes, be less likely to have success in that area. Maybe the same thing is with professional basketball. There have been very few guys under 5'6" who have been able to go pro. That's genetically governed. When it comes to, say, emotional well-being, mental capability, it's not as clear. From the research that I've come across, I'll use mental health as an example. The links between the actual genetics and a particular mental health condition just aren't consistently there. They may look at a combination of factors, and it's still not necessarily there. Even worse, when you try and isolate something like depression from all the other mental health conditions, it's really hard to isolate, because those who have gone through major depression may have also gone through anxiety, may have also been diagnosed with bipolar at times. Even schizophrenia in some cases is intermixed with these other diagnoses. So it makes it less clear that there's a genetic link to one of these. Now, there's another area of research called epigenetics. It gets to be a little bit of a technical situation, but it's a part of the genome that actually determines which of your genes turn on, which genes turn off. That can be passed down from generation to generation. It's really not part of the genetics that are, say, mapped by a company like 23andMe or Ancestry. But that seems to have more of an impact on whether you have that higher level of alert. Basically, is your body more rapidly producing adrenaline and cortisol than the next person? So that would be the closest link that I see based on the research I've read. I'm always, looking for other research. If somebody knows of something else that I should be looking at, I'd love to hear about it. That's my understanding as it is.
Right. Thank you so much for that. So now, in your opinion, what does the future hold for neuroscience, and how it can help us better understand success and trauma, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think you went down one road that is getting a lot more attention, and that is the transmagnetic stimulation, the TMS. Another one is emerging, and that's psychedelic assisted therapy. So both of those show some promise, and they're just not necessarily available widely in the United States. They're not necessarily covered under insurance. So I think as those improve and as access to those improves, that may be one or more areas. I think also having more awareness of the effects of trauma on our lives is going to have a big impact. And really, resolving the trauma or resolving the impact of it, it has an interesting side effect to some people. It can sometimes change the definition of success, because oftentimes when we look at success from a financial perspective, which is the easiest scorecard. And I think it's one reason why so many people look at it, or the things that they represent, the nice car, the nice house, boat, what have you. That actually tends to be a fear reaction, which is usually the result of stress. They are worried about how others perceive them. They want to be perceived as wealthy, because that in our Western world has importance. They want to be perceived as, say, successful or as a high achiever. Those words have a lot of meaning in our culture. Yet, more and more studies are showing that those who state that they are living fulfilling lives is generally not tied to the finances or those outward signs of success. It's much more tied to areas like community and giving and relationships, a sense of awe, which is an interesting one that's getting a lot more discussion now, but that's basically understanding there's something a lot bigger than me. Whether you're looking at nature, whether it's something in religion or spirituality, having that sense of awe leads to a more fulfilled life. So, yeah, the definition of success, I think, for individuals will start to change. I personally would love to see the definition of success as society change in that direction as well.
Yeah. So my own take in that aspect is a lot of people they often attribute success to possession. You could be successful just being a plumber. If that's what you love to do, that's what gives you joy. And every one of us don't have to be a doctor or whatever you think gives you joy and you think you want to be, that's good, because there's a standard to success in this Western world whereby you have to go to like probably coming off the red carpet with a limo, with all the security bodyguard. So it's weird. Yeah, it could be a success for that person. Maybe the person want to be a celebrity, but we all can be celebrities, or we all can be coming out from a limo with red carpet, and so it's very important to understand success in your own. Take success in your own view. Just if whatever you aspire to be is success to you, then aspire to be it. Not all jobs are celebrated, but everybody is adding to the universe greatness. All right, the little person, the big person, and when you say little, it depends on what you call little. So it's very very important to take note of that. So one last question before we round up, because we have spent more than 1 hour, which is just like it's
gone by.
Yeah. So for the listeners that are listening to this program, that are facing biological, they never knew about this until today and all the things they've heard from you, and they're like, oh, so I'm facing this trauma from childhood, this is what's stopping me, I didn't even know this. So what do you suggest to those facing biological and traumatic barriers towards achieving their goals? Yeah, let me
that's a really great question, because if somebody is sitting here today and making that connection for the first time, they're probably going to have two different thoughts. One is a light bulb. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And the other side, they may be prone to beating themselves up and kind of looking at, oh man, I wish I had never gotten myself into the situation that resulted in the trauma, or I should have recognized this earlier. For the person experiencing the light bulb, I say, great. And I would actually encourage, working on it from there. The person who is prone to beating themselves up, though, and this is hard to do, believe me, I know, is have some grace for yourself. Recognize that those things that happened in the past and your response to them were in many ways outside of your control, especially because you didn't have this new set of knowledge. You didn't have the parts connected. And be willing to, I'm going to get into an area that will take a lot longer, but be willing to have some grace for yourself in that, and grace for others who may have been involved in the traumatic situation. That's super hard, and that's why it's going to take a longer conversation, but I would pursue that. So I mentioned an assessment earlier. I did make an assessment available, which basically looks at somebody's state and evaluates whether trauma is interfering with them having a fulfilling life. So I made that available. If anybody wants it, they can just text the word assessment to 33777, and you'll get a text asking for your email. We'll shoot out that assessment right away. And I highly encourage you to take it. If somebody is interested in going through a coaching program with me, they recognize the impact of it and the benefits, I'd highly suggest at the end of that assessment, there's a link to schedule a strategy. It's a free strategy call with me where we can talk about how I might be able to help, or even some quick tips that may be helpful in their situation. So I highly recommend that. Those are what I would suggest to somebody who's hearing this for the first time and not knowing what to do with it. Oh, that and the breathe tip. That at least, that'll at least give you a 20% bump there.
All right, that's great. You can also share your social media handles if they need to follow up with you after this. I'm going to put our that in the description also, but just in case for people who really want to follow up and learn more about the subject matter that we spoke about today, you can always reach out to him on social media handles, and you can follow up with what for the assessment is very, very important. I myself am going to send a text to the number so I can get assessment. So, and it's very, very important to always take note of this because a lot of people really have been in the dark for years. They don't really understand why they can actually achieve. I've seen a lot of people that each time they try to take that bold step, they just can't. There's something just, holding them down. They might have done everything, but when it's time to close, they just find something dragging them back. So, which is one of the reasons, when we talk about this topic, I'm like, oh, this is one of the best topics I've ever heard about. And it's going to really help a whole lot of people. So, I would love you, Matt. Thank you so much for coming today. I would love to have you up for another program so we can discuss more, especially, topics that's similar to this or even more about this for people that really want to learn more about this topic. I really love to have you more. So what are your last words? For people, for listeners, we call them winners on this program.
All right. For all the winners on the program, listen, we're all winners. And if you're somebody who has gone through trauma and you're thinking, hey, this is a light bulb for me, re-listen to this if you want. Get in touch with me. But most of all, have some grace for yourself and those around you. It's a really big deal. And, I feel for you. I've been there. So I'll leave you with that. Just some grace for yourself.
All right. Thank you. All right. Winners, thank you for tuning into this illuminating episode, because this episode is illuminating where we get to understand some things that nobody we've never really thought about, or some of you might have known about it, but a lot of people don't know about this. Thank you for tuning in to this illuminating episode of the Winner Circle. We uncover the secret behind the science of success and the impact of biology and trauma on our ability to achieve our goals. I hope this episode has given you a fresh insight, just as it did for me, and also you've been able to get some practical tips that you can apply in your own life and also in your work to boost your performance. Also, I'm sure this episode has been able to help you understand how you can manage stress and stay focused on your priorities. So you need to remember that success is a lifelong journey of growth and learning. So it's now up to you to take control and unlock your full potential. I also want to thank my honorable guest, Matt McCarthy, for sharing his wisdom and also his knowledge and also his experience with us, and also giving us a deeper understanding of how brain works and what we can do to influence our success, even using himself as an example. So until next time, I want us to keep learning. We need to stay resilient, and you need to believe in the power to succeed. So this is Jay, you already know, for Winner Circle. Don't forget to rate, review our podcast on your favorite platform, from Spotify to Apple to Amazon. Wherever you're listening to this, I want you to put a rating here. All right. Just give us a good review and follow and share to your friends. Let them listen to it. You can also connect with us on YouTube because the video is going to be on YouTube, Instagram, Winner Circle with Jay, YouTube Winner Circle with Jay. You already know this already. All right. Just for new listeners, you need to take note of that. So until next episode, bye for now and take care.
This is the symbol of Adewole Record.